welcome to CICan's New Perspective Live, and the show where we talk about what matters to you. And today we're going to be talking about hacking education, in a digital world. And as this is a live show, anything can happen. We love how that happens. So, and this is just exactly that. I want to get back and take a step back, and I want to talk about our corporate partners and thank them, CICan's corporate partners, for making Perspectives Live possible. We would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge them first and foremost. So a big thank you to TD, Avis Budget, Field Effect, and BGIS for making this thing happen. And I will say, just before we came live, I did mention to all my guests on the show, I said, anything can happen live. Well, we're living in proof of it right now. So my co-host, who I'm sure is now petrified to be joining me a little later on in the show, is Dr. Paula Burns, who many of you know as the president of Lethbridge College and the chair of CICan's board of directors. And what's going to happen is a little later on in the show, Paula's going to be joining me, and she's going to be having a discussion with some of her guests, some very special guests. And let me tell you who those guests are. We have Suzanne Brant, who's the president of First Nations Technical Institute from here in Ontario. But Nicole Johnson, research director, Canadian Digital Learning Research Association, who's based out of British Columbia, she'll be joining us. And Dr. Veletsianos, George Veletsianos, full professor, School of Education and Technology at Royal Roads University, and the Canada Research Chair in Innovation Learning and Technology, and the Commonwealth of Learning Chair in Flexible Learning, and he's based, of course, out of British Columbia. But if you are watching us right now on Facebook Live, what I'd like you to be doing, please, is actually go over to slido.com. That's slido.com. You're still going to be able to watch the show there too. So on slido.com, what happens is that this is a tool that we use that you enter the hashtag perspectives, and this is your way to engage with us as well. So what happens is that we are going to be using this you can ask and pose questions. You can ask and pose questions, and by posing those questions, you're going to be able to, at the same time, vote on those questions and read on all those questions. So those questions will be elevated to the top of the queue, and then from there, when we get to the live Q&A portion, we're going to be able to work with and ask those questions to our guests. But there's also two other features I want you to focus in on. One is an ideas section. And in the ideas section, what I would like you to do is, if you have comments on the show, or you have something you see or hear spurns an idea, please, this is the opportunity for you to be able to actually go in and log in and place that down, so we can keep that information and refer back to it afterwards. And then finally, I think the best way to get this started is if we actually start with a polling question. Now let me just get up close, put on my glasses so I can actually read the polling question. From your perspective, so go to the polls and you can see, from your perspective, it's live right now. What will post-COVID-19 look like for post-secondary institutions? Will online education be no longer important, and will we predominantly return to face-to-face teaching and learning? Will teaching and learning be hybrid or blended, greatly influenced by digital transformation? Or will online education be the delivery mode of choice and expand access and strengthen excellence in teaching and learning? I guess there is no right or wrong answer to that question, and we're going to but I'll be curious to get your answers on it, and we're going to revisit those with my co-host Paula a little later on in the show. But before we go on too much further, let me introduce none other than Denise Amiot, President and CEO of CICan. Denise, are you there?
I am there, absolutely.
I'm sorry for messing up at the beginning. I hope I'll still have a job for the next show, Denise. But I'm doing the best I can. And but this is all part of what we're going to be talking part and parcel about is digital learning and digital education. And with the pandemic, the institutions and colleges across the country have had to make a major shift. What are your thoughts on this?
My God, Andrew, those things happen, so do not worry first. Before I answer your questions, I'd like to take this opportunity, Andrew, to acknowledge that the land on which we are hosting our virtual show is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. So to answer your questions, with COVID-19, post-secondary education has changed dramatically. Whether we talked about e-learning, whether we talked about e-teaching, and even using a variety of digital platforms. So one of the unique strengths of colleges and institutes, it's really their ability to respond quickly to changes in their environment and to ensure that they meet the needs of the students, the needs of faculty, the needs of staff, and also the needs of communities that they serve. So when we talk about incorporating digital technologies, it's not new for colleges and institutes. But what is new is maybe the fact that we had to do it even more. We had to step up further in the delivery approaches to teaching and learning. And let's not forget that our colleges and institutes serve so many different communities, from large urban centers to small, rural, northern locations. And they each have their unique challenges. And for many of our member institutions learners, connectivity is a huge challenge. And it has been. And let's only think about Indigenous students and other students living in rural, northern, or remote areas. Because often the internet access is not accessible, or even the equipment is not accessible.
Connectivity, Denise, is a major concern as you were addressing right now, and it's also a barrier, as we know, and I suspect we're going to be talking about that a lot more with our guests a little later on. Denise, I thank you so much for teeing up the program as we have, and I would like to. And I hope you'll go ahead and vote on the polling question too, because we're just going to go ahead and we're going to take a look, because Paula and I are going to be discussing that right now. So thank you, Denise, and really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Now,
take care.
Thank you, Denise. Now, moving on, I'm so delighted to welcome my co-host, Dr. Paula Burns. Paula, how are you there?
I am.
Yeah. Hey, welcome. What a privilege it is to be able to host this. Now, I've already messed this up in front of the president of CICan. I hope I don't mess it up in front of the chair of the board as well. So I'll do the absolute best I can to carry this conversation. But this is a fascinating discussion, because we are in challenging times, and many colleges, and as like your own and right across the country, are being forced to have faced with new ways of delivering education and learning. But I think it would be advantageous, if it's okay with you, if we actually went ahead and took a look at the polling results. Do you think that would be a good way to start it off?
Yeah, sure. That would be a great way to start it off.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just showing the results now on what people are saying, and I think it should be coming up on our screen in a second. But it looks like that, oh, here we go. It looks like that teaching and learning will be hybrid or blended and greatly influenced by digital transformation. 81% of those people watching said that that they think. How does that square with you? How does that make you? How does that feel? Does that seem to make sense?
Yeah, that does seem to make sense. I would say it's maybe a little bit higher than I thought, based on some of the conversations that happen about, are we going to return to normal? But I think certainly we have recognized the changes that have taken place, and we'll be talking a little bit later about, what are the things that we really want to keep from what we've learned over the last 8 or 9 months.
Well, it's interesting, because before I turn the show over to you fully, I sat down with some students earlier this week, and I gained their perspective by the name of, and I'm just going to read his name here. His name was Isaac Bungie. He was a first year student and president of the student association at Heritage College in Quebec, and he was rather impressed by the he was rather impressed by the way that the school has actually supported him. Now, one of the challenges that he had, and unfortunately that video is just not available right now. Oh, wait a second. I think we have it. We can bring it up. Well, let me just see if we can listen to see what Isaac had to say.
Welcome to the show. From your perspective and personal experience, what have you found challenging in studying in a virtual environment?
Yeah, I'd say there's two main challenges to a virtual environment. The academic challenge of not being able to talk with your teachers in the hallway or just ask them small questions, but also the social challenge of not being with classmates and not having the same on-campus activities to keep your motivation up.
But what have you found that has worked really well in this new learning environment?
I'm quite impressed by our administration and our teachers, really. To compare last semester to this semester, they've definitely improved a lot in their tech applications and learning how to use all the different platforms. But they're getting better. It's a learning process for everybody, for sure. I'd say online lectures are working as a success, but I think evaluations and other areas need more work, for sure.
In what ways is your college supporting you? Do you find CICan supporting you in your case?
Yeah, so there is a lot of effort being put into that. We have academic advisors that you can arrange meetings with. Our campus is actually open, so you can go and use the library, use the Wi-Fi. We're also handing out or lending out laptops from the school if students need those sort of resources. Our school also has a foundation to financially support students if they need bursaries, just to cover normal costs at home if they're out of job with COVID. So our school is doing quite a bit to try to support students through this.
But what could be done differently, do you think?
Well, as I said before, it's a learning experience. We're changing the platforms every day. The school is trying to give us new protocols every day. There's lots to change. There's lots to learn, but they're doing the best they can, and I appreciate their efforts, for sure. What
is the internet connectivity like up in Masham?
It varies. There's only one company to go with, so it's difficult. Some people only use data, and some people we have Exitel, but the school is actually letting us test dummy some of the new systems that work with the satellite. So I'm lucky in that case, for sure.
Isaac, thank you again so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Paula, can you hear me now? I just want to make sure that you can hear me okay.
Yes, I can hear you. Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry. We had some mic issues, so we've made some changes in that. What did you think of what we just heard?
I think it's an incredible sort of what the students are experiencing and how they're being so flexible and appreciative for what the faculty and others are doing to support them. And one of the things that I heard, and that we'll talk about a little bit more too, is that, you know, just showing lots of compassion for all of our employees and our students in this situation, because it is a very much a learning process. And I think our conversation today with our guests will be about there's some pluses and minuses, and how do we learn from this to engage learners in their curriculum. And I think, as Isaac said, you know, what does assessment look like, which, you know, is one of the sort of challenges, I would say, at this point in time.
Absolutely. Well, let me turn the show back over to you and let you welcome in your guests as well. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
And I am welcoming Nicole and Suzanne and George into a conversation that we're going to have together. And we appreciate the various perspectives that the guests are going to bring and the perspective of the audiences as you're listening. I thought maybe I'd just start to share a little bit of my story from an online learning perspective. When I did my doctorate, which was in curriculum teaching and learning, Almost 20 years ago now, I started it, and I was on maternity leave at the time. So, speaking to the student experience, the flexibility, I did all of my coursework actually online in a platform that was then called a constructivist learning platform. So really, building on the input of students as well as facilitation from faculty. And then I also did my master's from Royal Roads University, and you're going to hear a little bit about the Royal Roads experience. And I think most of us will know that they have quite a history with online learning and, had perfected it long before the rest of us needed to even think about it. So we're going to talk today a little bit about what some of the issues are, what some of the impact is, and then really what the future can hold for us. So I'm going to maybe throw the first question out to Nicole. And Nicole, maybe you could talk a little bit about, what some of the issues are in terms of even things like defining what online learning is and what different institutions are talking about.
For sure. And thank you very much for having me here today. So I'm the research director of the Canadian Digital Learning Research Association. And what we do is we've been tracking the growth and development of online learning over time. And one of the things that we've found as we're looking at that is that different institutions have different definitions of what online learning is. So in terms of tracking online enrollments, for example, within the institution itself, there are often, everyone knows what they're tracking for their own purposes. But if we have two institutions talking together about online learning, many times they've got they're using the same words, but have two very different meanings for what online learning is. And of course, the pandemic context, which we're in now, it's my opinion, it's exacerbated that a bit because, of course, we've brought in, the emergency teaching with everyone rapidly shifting online, which, all of these fall under a blanket of, yes, it's online course delivery, but, online learning itself, for those of us who are in the field, has a distinct pedagogy to it. It's, it's an intentional approach to deliver rich, engaging learning experiences in an online platform.
Yeah, so true. And I think one of the things that we talked about earlier was just that, what happened in essentially March for all of us was, in many cases, emergency remote teaching and not online learning at all. But I think, as Isaac, our student, pointed out, we're getting better at it, and some were more prepared than others. So maybe I could ask George if you could just talk a little bit about, sort of what are maybe some of the issues that we're seeing in terms of, even as we develop our expertise in online learning, and some of the challenges that institutions are facing or, learners as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that question. So as was mentioned, my name is George Veletsianos, and I'm a professor and Canada Research Chair at Royal Roads University. I've been studying online learning for nearly a decade now. And, when I've been studying this field, it's been in sort of pockets, right? Some institutions do it. Some institutions have been doing it for years. But in March, really, we found ourselves in a situation where nearly every institution had to sort of rapidly switch into this new sort of approach to accommodate, a global pandemic. So the impacts on the institution themselves have been, in many ways, uneven. Some have been very quick to switch and transition, depending on the infrastructure that they had, the preparation that their faculty have had, and the same with students. Some have been able to transition to being online, either due to having devices or being, comfortable with sort of being in digital spaces, whereas for others it has been very difficult. By and large, institutions in Canada have been supportive of students, faculty, and staff in this transition. There's been very many examples of institutions collaborating to support one another in transitioning. But, the impact as I mentioned before, have not only been uneven, but the negative impacts have been mostly felt by those in our communities who have already been disadvantaged, right?
Yes.
So individuals who haven't had access to devices or high-speed internet, or individuals who are already taking care of family now being asked to take on even more responsibilities. So I think that is something that our community has to, come to terms with and address in material ways, and not just our communities, as in our institutions, but provincial governments and so on.
Yeah. So that's a really big key, I think, to for us to talk about and to consider the perspectives of what the impact is. And I think, George, as you've pointed out, that for sure some of the more vulnerable populations have been disadvantaged even further. I wonder if the flip side isn't true, and where sometimes they've been given more opportunity as well. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. And I'm going to ask Suzanne if she would like to jump in here and talk a little bit about the impact at your institution and what you've been seeing, and how, from an Indigenous perspective, this shift to online learning is going.
Well, thank you, Paula. So at our institute, we had to transition everyone into, as you know, the virtual classroom space. And it's been difficult because in our classes, we bring people together from all over, First Nations from all over Ontario, into a week-long session. So we do a very intense mode of delivery with our students. And we've served, 102 First Nations in Ontario. So bringing them together in a classroom, over the years has been about providing cultural services, having a cultural advisor in the classroom with them, helping to reclaim, who they are as an Indigenous person. We bring ceremony into the classroom. That healing takes place in the classroom, along with all of the skills that they need to be successful. And moving it into a virtual online kind of platform has been very difficult to provide those same kinds of services. We all know that, a lot of that people are medicine for one another. So when you're in a digital environment, it makes it more challenging, but we still our enrollments are still actually exceeded our expectations this year. We've got our cultural advisors present in the classroom still, and we still have our student success facilitators helping. So it's been interesting. The connectivity issue has been big, but we've been doing workarounds, helping our students find other ways to connect into the classroom, if it's just by phone, and then providing them access to the materials in other ways. So it's been a great learning experience, but one that we hope to continue to carry forward, because it's actually given about 10% of our enrollment was based on being able to join because of the virtual settings. So yeah, it's increased, by 10%. So that we hope to continue that. We're going to take advantage of the opportunity through that process. So yeah.
10% is an incredible amount to be able to increase the access, for sure. And you mentioned the connectivity piece, and I know that CICan is working diligently behind the scenes and in front of the scenes to bring that issue forward, to make sure that in all of our communities across Canada that there is that access. And as was pointed out to me a number of weeks ago in a different conversation, is that we may think it is the northern, rural, remote communities that don't have internet access, but there are people, for example, in downtown Vancouver that also don't have internet access because of the affordability piece. And so really trying to provide that access. I know in many of our campuses, that's been a priority, even as we've needed to be as remote as possible, that we have had provided space for students to be able to come in and use computers and use the internet. And that's an important piece for us to continue. So as we continue the discussion, we will, in a couple of moments, look forward to what the future holds for us as post-secondary, and how we have learned and what we will use. And certainly 80% of our audience thinks that we're in a different mode for sure. A new way of being in education is emerging. But just open it up to each of you to say, what are some of the issues and impacts that you see, and that you'd like to just talk a little bit more based on your own work. Anyone can go first, but George, maybe since you were the middle, we'll get you to start.
Sure, I can do that. Thank you for that. Thinking about the future is super interesting, because when we do think about the future, in many ways, we sort of imagine what that could be. And there are many authors and thinkers that have argued that the future really is in the now and the here, but it's sort of unevenly distributed. And I think what that means for us is thinking about whether there is a sort of normal to go to. In many conversations, I've heard people say, "Oh, I can't wait to go back to normal. I can't wait for things to be how they were." But I think what we need to recognize is that the normal that we are accustomed to had very many problems. It wasn't equitable. It wasn't accessible. It required people, for instance, to leave their homes and their jobs to move to somewhere else to attend education. I think in imagining and building that future that we want, I think we should think about what were the inadequacies of the past that we can address, so that we don't have to face them again. The future can be better, but we need to actively sort of build it to be better. It can be more of everything. It can be more pedagogically relevant. It can be more equitable. It can be more satisfactory, both for students and administrators and faculty. We can develop the future to work better for all of us. But doing so means not just adding technology here or adopting online learning there. It needs sort of real action on systemic issues, and I think that's one of our challenges.
Yeah, great point, for sure. One of the things that strikes me too, as we think about, and I agree with you, we're building the future now, is the influence of, in our institution, it's called the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Innovation, and those folks who have been the instructional designers, those who have taught people how to facilitate online, and just how much that support is required as we build that future. And I think sort of recognizing those folks across the country and the incredible amount of work that they've done as well, along with the faculty. So Nicole, Suzanne, who would like to go next and talk a little bit about what you see, the issues and the future?
Well, I can go next. I really think that there's great opportunity. There's been a lot of awareness about some of the challenges in First Nations communities through this pandemic, and there's lots of opportunity now for us to connect with people who are within our communities and outside of our communities, who can bring to the education environment solutions to some of the issues that we face. And it's given us as teams within FNTI an opportunity to have great discussions, connecting us through this virtual connection. And I think there's lots of positive things that are going to come out of this. And as George stated, equitable changes, pedagogical changes. So I'm really looking forward to the future. I'll be glad when the pandemic's over, but looking forward to the future. So yes.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, Nicole, what would you like to talk about the future and how it looks?
Well, and I think the poll response is very reflective of what I've seen in the multiple research projects that I've been doing since March. It's been interesting. When we hit the ground, running in March, and we did some early research there was the sense of, overwhelm, and what are we doing, and when is this going to end? And as we saw professional development over the summer, and it was interesting, it didn't matter, and this was both in Canada and the US, it didn't matter what type of professional development faculty received, they all felt it beneficial. And our results showed us that people were feeling much more prepared going into the fall semester, and we're really starting to see a strong sense of optimism. And in talking to, faculty and administrators, one of the things that's really interesting is this idea that, it's not going to go back. We actually want to take, despite the hardship, despite the challenge, some really good, innovative, and exciting practices have emerged that we don't want to throw out when this pandemic is done. And it's been exciting to see institutions innovate and this desire to collaborate with one another to, how do we handle this? How do we do that? One of the particular challenges we found was with hands-on learning. And how do you translate those lab experiences, those practical hands-on experiences into a virtual setting? And at the same time, we've got institutions who are starting to figure it out, and they're wanting to share these ideas of how do we do this? And they're, faculty are, developing teaching practices that they're like, oh, this is even getting more engagement than what I was doing before. So it's very interesting and exciting to see this. It's almost spark this renewed excitement for, evolving and learning and growing as institutions and as individual faculty members.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. There's been so many innovative ideas that have come forward, especially for that sort of hands-on experiential learning that we hadn't even imagined could be done. One of the things that maybe we could just spend a little bit of time talking about, and Isaac, the student, mentioned it in terms of, there's the academic challenge, and we're learning and we're building and we're being innovative, and then there's the social challenge. And certainly I know in a number of surveys that have been done with students around the impact of the pandemic, that's probably, I know in our case, it was more of an issue than the teaching and learning part of it, and that social challenge piece. And our service departments across the country have also had to adapt and how to provide sort of routine services like how to pay your tuition and, some of the basic things, but also then around that social aspect. And, and what are some of the things that you're seeing that are maybe some innovative ideas around sort of addressing that need for social engagement with students? Anybody?
I'm willing to share. We've actually been able to, open up lunch hours for our staff to learn beading and other kinds of cultural activities. And so we practiced that at the beginning, how to do that in this virtual environment. And now we're able to actually transfer that to our students. And it's been an interesting, opportunity. We also have fun activities that we do, like different games and stuff we can do where everybody has their cell phones and they're engaged in these fun activities. And so we've tried to really bring in lots of fun things and also learning activities that and we shipped out, beads and things to the communities to support these kinds of things, this kind of growth. So, and that, brings people together in a different environment. It's still a learning environment, but it's more social. So, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a great idea, and I know that there's many more, but I know that Andrew would also like to come back and join our conversation with us. So thank you to all of you for participating and for the work that you do every day in supporting post-secondary education and online learning.
so much, and I know that, and all of you, but don't go away because
Oh,
we
we won't.
ton of questions. We have a ton of questions that are coming in right now. You're just going to get the voice of God, and it's there I am, and I could just be the voice of God and just holler out the questions. But Paul, I'd like you to participate in these questions too, because you represent a very important voice to this discussion as well. And we have so many of them. So if it's okay with you guys, can I go ahead and just start asking and maybe start volleying these around?
Sure, sounds great.
And the top question that's come in, and it's kind of a question. I'm going to read it. It says, so important to recognize unique needs of Indigenous students. How are our non-Indigenous colleges can engage more with Indigenous communities in a digital world? So I think the question is how can our non-Indigenous colleges engage more with Indigenous communities in a digital world? And I know, Suzanne, you have a unique experience in this, but Paula, I'd like to start off with your perspective, if I can. You're in Lethbridge. Let's go ahead and hear what you think on this issue.
Yeah. So I guess what I could talk about is our own, personal experience with that. And certainly in this fall semester, we have an Indigenous services team that's very active on campus in terms of providing cultural activities. And they, of course, were challenged at the very beginning to say, how can we sort of make sure that the rest of the college community is involved with some of the cultural activities, Indigenous cultural activities, with our elders. And if you keep in mind in the areas that we serve, most of those reserves have been closed to visitors throughout the entire pandemic. So needing to move our elders to an online environment as well. But what they did was, similar to what Suzanne was talking about, and just being able to recreate some of the activities in a new and different way. So we had a Rock Your Mocks Day, for example. Everybody's encouraged to wear their moccasins, take pictures, post them on Instagram. That's one example. We had a number of sort of cultural celebrations that were hosted online by our Indigenous service team on Zoom, and our entire college community was invited to participate. So we've been trying to keep up similar things, but altering them to that environment to really make sure, because Indigenous learning and our role in truth and reconciliation is a really important piece for us. So we continue to do that.
Suzanne, would you like to add something to this?
Yeah, one thing that happened for us in our institute is that by moving to this platform, we implemented a student learning system, and we moved all of our curriculum into a storyboard. So it really was, we were able to demonstrate to our learners the Indigenous learning outcomes, so that they could actually see, and we can demonstrate now, the growth that they're actually gaining through Indigenous knowledge. And that was wonderful for us. I mean, we always knew, by having a cultural advisor in the classroom, assisting with the curriculum, assisting with the knowledge system, its Indigenous knowledge system, was very beneficial. But now we've actually got it recorded, and we can now demonstrate and map those things. So this has really given us a great opportunity.
And George, Nicole, how about either of you? Have you guys done any research into either of these areas? You can say no. It's okay. You don't have to have a perspective on everything on this show. Okay?
No, and I would say I don't have much to add to what's already been said on that.
Well, George.
Sure. I can chime in a little bit here on the sort of micro instructional practices, right? I think there's room in our classrooms to not only acknowledge, Indigenous perspectives and approaches, but truly integrate them in the ways that we teach and learn. And I think this has been concomitantly happening. In addition to all of the shifts that have been happening with the pandemic at our institution. So, for instance, asking questions like, what does your curriculum look like? What does it include? Is it as inclusionary as it could be? And we do that work with Indigenous education advisors, with our elders, with Centers for Teaching and Learning, as it was acknowledged before, with those pedagogical experts that can support us in this endeavor, and who in many ways know more about these things than faculty do because it's not their expertise.
Thank you, George. I appreciate that. And in getting everybody involved, I think is going to be a key to that, to the success of engaging Indigenous communities for sure. Let me move on to the next question, if I may. And Suzanne, I want to start with you on this question, please. And then I want to move to Paula's response too, as the chair of CICan's board. But how can CICan be part of a strong advocacy for Canada-wide internet infrastructure as required recovery investment for federal and provincial governments? And you notice how I'm starting with you first, Suzanne, and then I'll let the chair respond subsequently there afterwards. But Suzanne, what do you think?
Well, definitely, identifying that there are many communities, not just First Nations communities, that need access. And I think, CICan plays a big role in showing where that access needs to be enhanced. And because post-secondary plays a critical role in social development, economic development, CICan plays a big role in making sure, again, that knowledge is out there and that awareness is there, so that, post-secondary institutes can do their job. So, yeah.
Madam Chair, may I ask what your opinion is on this?
Yeah, I would think, I know that CICan plays a huge role from an advocacy perspective in advocating for all of our learners across Canada. We know that we have institutions in pretty much every community across Canada in some way. And certainly this has not just been on the agenda for us for the last 6 months or so. This has been an item of access on our agenda for quite some time. And so we continue to advocate at the federal government level for sure with the various ministers, and recognizing that it is a key part to the recovery. And I think also within our provincial jurisdictions, it has been highlighted as well. And each of the members of CICan are, it is a conversation that's happening in pretty much every meeting I go to, that we're making politicians, municipal as well as provincial, as well as community and business leaders know how much of an issue the access, particularly around connectivity and broadband, is both on reserves in our remote communities and, as I said, in our cities. But certainly CICan is very vocal about this throughout the organization as a whole.
Well, I know for sure that this has been added as one of the major priorities for this current government, and I know it's in thanks to CICan's work that's been part and parcel with a lot of the business community that's been pushing this as well. George, I want to move on to the next question. Is Canada well positioned among other Commonwealth countries in hacking education in a digital world? And I'd like to start with you, George, and then if I could, I'd like to get Nicole's perspective. I know you guys work closely on this as well. So how about you, George, in your role as the chair for that?
Absolutely. That's an excellent question, and one I'm happy to give an answer to. Online and distance education has been a staple in Canadian society and education over the years. So we have a long history of practice and expertise in this area. So we're absolutely positioned to provide, in many ways, global leadership on this. Importantly, I think one of the sort of events that we've seen over the last few months that we haven't seen in other countries is this sort of desire in many ways for institutions to collaborate, to be able to support staff and faculty and students in this transition. I've seen amazing stories of sort of cooperation and support, institutions helping neighboring institutions, provinces, institution in one province helping institutions in other provinces, individuals sort of stepping up and doing, webinars to help people learn how to do experiential teaching and learning online, how to teach online, and so on. So I think we're absolutely well positioned, but we do have to take advantage of that opportunity. because the world is moving rapidly and quickly. And even though we have a history of expertise, we are facing a sort of new landscape.
And Nicole, how about yourself?
Yeah, I agree with what George has said. There's been a long time collaboration, amongst Canadian leaders in online learning at the international level. Canadian, we certainly don't act in our own silo, but paying attention to what people are doing around the world on this. I think to George's point, it's exciting to see the collaboration happening across provinces, amongst institutions. As someone who researches, online learning and its growth at the national level, that certainly has been a challenge in the past, is taking that pan-Canadian approach and looking at the country as a whole, because there is, in Canada, diversity is our strength, and that's a wonderful thing. But we also, when we're looking at it at a macro level, we need to bring a sense of cohesiveness and a sense of monitoring what's happening at a national level, rather than just at an institutional or at a provincial level.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Nicole. I'm going to read this next question. Are we redefining the concept of digital literacy as potentially all, I noticed that all is in all caps, all students need to do some learning online in the future? Will there be a choice of modes? Let me start with, George, you're from Royal Roads University. And you were sort of leaders in this, as Paula had mentioned earlier. Why don't we start with you and go around the table?
Sure. So I think all learners need to engage with sort of new literacies, one of which is digital literacies. That doesn't necessarily mean that students need to take an online course, but having digital literacies means being able to take advantage of those options when they're available, if those suit those individuals' needs. So for instance, it requires, some of us take it for granted, but it requires quite a bit to figure out how to find, an online learning provider, sign up for a course, manage all the notifications that are arriving in your inbox and so on, right? I think of my father, for example, who started using a computer in his 60s. And, the way that he managed it was for me to set up bookmarks for him to basically click on the bookmark and go to the newspaper to read the daily news. Without the necessarily digital literacies, he wouldn't be able to sign up for an online course, even if he was interested in it. So I think that's where the conversation becomes, well, how do we prepare our youth and not just our youth to participate in an economy, in a society which is increasingly digital.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody want to go next? Say, Nicole, we'll go around the table.
Sure. Yeah. I think too, it was getting better prior to 2020, but there's long been this sort of binary between face-to-face and online. And I think as we go forward, we're seeing a lot more blurred boundaries. I think of my own children, for example, even when they're doing in-class learning, they still need to have certain digital competencies. They need to be able to know how to log into things, do things online. And I think it's a matter of, there will be more and more digital integrated. I think we're going to move less from a model where it is, online or face-to-face, and more models where we're getting a blended mix. And naturally in that literacy has to emerge. With that said, I think there also needs to be mindfulness, like George says, of the accessibility in there, especially as we're looking at older learners. And even, the millennials and generation, Z, making sure that we understand that they not assuming that they have the technical knowledge that we might think they do just based on their age.
Suzanne, what about yourself? What do you want to add to this? Because we've talked about this already a little bit about how important it is to bring community in, and especially as it relates to First Nations, because that's such an important part of the learning process we had talked about earlier on. What do you think about that? What do you think about this?
I think we'll see our institute move towards options. Continuing in a online opportunity. If you'd asked me 3 years ago, I would have said never, just because of the experience that we need face to face with the cultural components. But now, after seeing what we're capable of and developing the capacity within our institute to provide an online process, I think we'll be seeing that we'll be providing those options. So we'll probably have two types of, and probably some blended options as well.
Well, and it's the blended thing that I'm surprised about. Paula, I want to just pick up on that real quickly, if I may, because, there's two things that are sort of coming to play in my mind. One is that we have, it's creating a leveling of the playing field right across in higher education and overall. And then the second thing is that we're also seeing, there are some programs that work better or can work successfully through but others, like other programs that need to have hands-on and you have to be in person, science-based programs, many of the technology. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think I have sort of two thoughts, but if I go back to the original question around digital literacy, I think there is, it is shifting what digital literacy means, but there really is a continuum, right? When it comes to learning online, and I think George spoke, there's, being able to just log into a course, for example. But the other end of the spectrum, simple online learning, is how many people have, searched on YouTube for a video on how to fix their dishwasher, for example, right? So that's online learning too, right? So it's really on a continuum. But one of the things I think too is that we often describe, online face-to-face or hybrid. Well, what the terminology we've started to use is more flexible learning, because sometimes it's online, sometimes it's face-to-face, sometimes it's a mix of both. And even how we structure the curriculum, where we may have thought that it was one or the other, or there was a certain amount that was done online and then you came to class. We're even thinking about things like, how do you bring students together for 1 week at a time, like Suzanne mentioned, where you do all the hands-on learning, especially in the pandemic. You minimize the number of students on campus at one time, but they get all the hands-on learning they need. And that's maybe like the flipped classroom model. So I would say it's a continuum and it's flexible, and yes, it's part of digital literacy.
Paula, thank you very much. And I want to just take a moment. Please don't go away, Paula, but if I may, on your behalf, and thank my entire panel for participating today. We're running really close to the end of the hour, and we really do want to stay on time. If it's all right by you, Paula, if you could just stick around, and
Sure.
For the rest of for everybody else, what I'd really like to do is I feel really bad. I want to go back and listen to what Trina had to say. Now, Trina was my original interview earlier on, and let me just I just want to make sure. Trina Jones is her name. She's in the carpentry program at Woodstock campus of New Brunswick Community College. Do you think we can play that video, please? I think let's give her the last perspective on this.
Trina, welcome to the show. I'm so happy that you're joining us here today. From your perspective and personal experience, what have you found challenging in studying in a virtual environment?
From my perspective, where I came into the school or this year as a mature student, I actually found that worked in my favor because I have a lot of work-life experience that helped me be organized. It was a small adjustment to get used to, I guess, taking tests again and learning to kind of balance all of that. But ultimately, I think compared to some of the students in my class that are younger, especially coming out of high school, it was a bit of a leap to go from high school into college and a blended learning environment where they're learning online, and some of them are learning largely online, a lot of the courses. But in my class in particular, I think some of them struggled at the front end just to get settled and understand the system and be able to have it work well for them.
So let me just continue on and ask you, what have you found that has really worked well in this new learning environment?
They've taken at the New Brunswick Community College level what they call a 7-1-7 approach. So we have 7 weeks where we take a block of modules, then we have a week off, and we take another 7 weeks. And ultimately, I think that works fairly well. It gives us a lot of flexibility and a week in between to readjust. And for students that were maybe struggling a bit, a week to catch up. But overall, the instructors have been extremely flexible, and they've adapted the courses enough so that the amount of hours that are required per course are less. And that's largely just because they understand that to sit in front of a laptop for 8 hours is unrealistic. So for someone like me who's working at the same time, that's given me the flexibility to actually do this. Because outside of COVID, I don't know that I would have taken a full year off away from career and life to take a year of carpentry. But right now, that gave me the ability to take advantage of maybe a little different work balance than I usually would have because of COVID. And so I took the opportunity to learn some new skills and some basics that I thought I was missing.
What could be done differently?
I think at the start, just maybe opening with soft skills only and getting people time to understand the learning management system, learn basic organizational skills, and put those courses like essential communications and things like that up front, rather than focusing straight into let's get into the shop and work through things and build things. It might have allowed everybody to get settled a little more gradual, work some kinks out, and without falling behind on their courses and jeopardizing whether they were going to pass or fail or maybe just get discouraged.
Trina, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives with us today. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for asking.
Paula, I felt so important that it was so important that we finished off, because I think this whole digital, we're talking about hacking digital education, and this created an important opportunity for Trina to be able to actually go back to school. And just I'll leave you with the final thoughts on today's show.
I think that how Trina has summed it up has been great in terms of, yeah, it does give opportunity for some people. There's things that we can learn about how to structure things, making sure that people are comfortable with the platforms that we're using. But certainly I've enjoyed the perspectives that everyone has shared. And I think that what I take away is the optimism about the way that we can continue to redefine post-secondary education as we embrace the things that are part of our present and our future.
Paula, thank you so much. And to everybody who shared their perspectives with us on today's show, we really, really appreciate it. This has been a very interesting experience. So thank you for everybody participating. Let me just, to wrap up, I'd like to say one more time to thank CICan's corporate partners for helping bring us the today's Perspective Live. And I'd like to remind everybody to join us again in 2 weeks' time. There is a French language version of the same discussion with different perspectives coming from and hosted by my colleague, none other than Normand Latour. So looking forward to welcoming you again on a future edition of Perspective Lives as we cover the topics that are most important to you. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're good. Thank you, everybody.